The rain came without warning, transforming the peaceful Colorado Valley into a deadly trap within minutes. Eleanor Parker never saw the wall of water that swept her wagon from the crossing, but Dr. Nathan Blackwood, watching from the ridge above, witnessed it all. What happened next would challenge the deepest prejudices of Willow Creek and force two strangers into a bond, neither wanted, yet neither could escape. This is a story of survival against impossible odds, of healing that goes beyond the physical, and of a love that defied the boundaries drawn by a fractured nation still nursing the wounds of war. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. April 1878 brought an unseasonable warmth to the Colorado Territory, the kind old-timers warned never lasted. Dr. Nathan Blackwood felt it in his bones as he gathered herbs along the eastern ridge of the Salinger Valley. The air too heavy, the sky a peculiar shade of bruised purple that spoke of trouble brewing in the mountains. At 32, Nathan had learned to read these signs with the same precision he read medical texts. His Apache mother had taught him the language of the land long before Yale Medical School taught him the language of science. Both served him well in his precarious position as the only doctor within 50 miles of Willow Creek, though doctor wasn't the word most townsfolk used when they discussed him behind his back. Half-breed medicine man was the kindest term. Others were less charitable, especially when the whiskey flowed at Thompson's saloon. But Nathan had made his peace with their prejudice years ago. They might distrust his heritage, but when gangrene threatened or childbirths went wrong, they showed up at his door all the same. He tucked the arnica plants into his satchel, scanning the horizon. The clouds had darkened further, stacking themselves against the mountains like soldiers preparing for battle. Thunder rumbled, distant but moving closer. Nathan had seen what spring storms could do to the narrow passes of the Salinger Valley. Flash floods had claimed more lives than outlaws in these parts. That's when he spotted the wagon, small, canvas-topped, pulled by a single horse. It was moving too fast along the lower trail, heading straight for Cottonwood Crossing. Even from this distance, Nathan could see it was driven by a woman, alone, seemingly oblivious to the danger ahead. "Damn it," he muttered, scrambling down the ridge. No time to reach his horse. No time to intercept her before she hit the crossing. The first raindrops, fat and heavy, began to fall as Nathan ran, skidding down the slope toward the valley floor. The distant rumble had transformed into something more ominous, the sound of water moving with purpose. The woman had reached the crossing now. Nathan waved his arms, shouting warnings that the wind snatched away. She paused, seemed to deliberate, then urged her horse forward into the shallow stream. Too late. The flash flood came around the bend like a charging bull, 6 feet of churning water and debris, moving faster than any horse could run. Nathan watched in horror as it hit the wagon broadside. The horse screamed, a sound that would haunt him for months, as it was torn from the traces. The wagon flipped, tumbled, and was swept away in an instant. Without thinking, Nathan calculated. The flood's trajectory cut downhill at an angle and ran along a parallel path. If the woman survived the initial impact, she'd be carried around the eastern bend where the valley widened. There, perhaps, he might have a chance. His lungs burned. As he pushed himself beyond reason, the rain pelted his face, his boots slipping in the rapidly forming mud. Yet he kept his eyes fixed on the debris field being carried along the new river that had once been a gentle stream. There, a flash of blue fabric among the tumbling branches and broken timber. Nathan angled closer to the water's edge, following the current's path. The widening of the valley had slowed the flood's fury somewhat, creating a series of eddies where larger debris collected. The blue fabric appeared again. A dress, he realized, worn by a woman clinging to a section of wagon. Canvas tangled in a half-submerged cottonwood. She wasn't moving, but her head was above water. For now, Nathan didn't hesitate. He shed his coat and medical bag, securing them under a boulder, and waded into the freezing current. The force of it nearly took his feet from under him at once. He fought diagonal to the flow, using the cottonwoods that lined the original stream bed as anchors. By the time he reached her, his muscles screamed in protest. The woman's face was deathly pale, her lips tinged blue, blonde hair plastered to her head. Blood trickled from a nasty gash above her left temple. But she was breathing, barely. "I've got you," Nathan said, though he doubted she could hear. "Just hold on." Getting her to shore proved a battle against nature itself. Twice the current nearly claimed them both. But Nathan's stubborn determination, the same quality that had carried him through medical school despite the scorn of classmates and professors alike, refused to yield. When he finally dragged her onto the muddy bank, the rain had intensified to a blinding sheet. She wasn't conscious, but she was alive. The wound on her temple looked worse up close, and her right arm hung at an unnatural angle. "Broken, most likely. Mom?" Nathan tapped her cheek gently. "Can you hear me?" Nothing. Her skin felt like ice beneath his fingers. Hypothermia was setting in quickly, a deadly threat even without her other injuries. He needed to get her warm and dry immediately. His cabin lay a mile upriver, impossible to reach through the flooding lowlands. But there was another option. The old trapper's shelter, tucked into the eastern ridge, not 500 yards away. If it still stood. Nathan gathered the unconscious woman in his arms. She was slight, couldn't have weighed more than 100 pounds, but carrying her through the downpour up a muddy slope would test the limits of his endurance. "You're not dying today," he muttered, as much to himself as to her. "Not on my watch." The trapper's shelter, little more than a three-sided lean-to reinforced with stones, still stood against the ridge. Nathan ducked inside, grateful for even this meager protection from the elements. He laid the woman down on the relatively dry earthen floor, quickly checking her vital signs. Pulse weak but present, breathing shallow. The broken arm would need setting, the head wound cleaning and stitching, but first, warmth. With practiced efficiency, Nathan gathered what dry wood remained in the shelter's small cache. Using flint from his belt pouch, he coaxed a small fire to life, positioning it where the smoke would draw outward, but the heat would reflect inward. Only then did he take a proper look at the woman he'd rescued. Even soaked and injured, her delicate features and fine clothing spoke of breeding and wealth, not the typical settler's wife or daughter. A gold locket hung around her neck, inscribed with the initials EP. Her hands, though scraped from the ordeal, showed no signs of hard labor. A stranger to these parts, clearly. Nathan knew what this meant. A well-bred white woman, alone with him. A half-Apache doctor, distrusted by half the territory. If she died, they'd hang him without trial. If she lived but spoke against him, his reputation would be destroyed. But these calculations came as distant, academic thoughts. His healer's instincts overrode all else. He opened his recovering medical bag, miraculously still dry inside, and set to work. First, he cut away the sleeve of her dress to assess the broken arm, a clean break of the radius, painful but straightforward to set. Next, he cleaned the head wound, finding it deep but not life-threatening. 7 neat stitches closed it, his fingers working with the precision that had made even his most prejudiced professors at Yale reluctantly admit his skill. As he worked, the storm's fury reached its peak. The rain hammered against the shelter's roof, and lightning cracked close enough to make the air smell of metal. But inside, a fragile bubble of life persisted. The small fire, the unconscious woman, and the half-Apache doctor fighting to save. A stranger who might well become his accuser. Eleanor Parker, Nathan read from a small leather-bound journal that had somehow remained tucked in her dress pocket, miraculously dry. The first page bore not only her name, but her destination, Willow. Greek, Colorado Territory, the very town that barely tolerated Nathan's presence. "Well, Eleanor Parker," he said to the unconscious woman as he carefully wrapped her in his dry coat, "you've had quite a journey, but it's not ending here. Not today." As darkness fell, Nathan maintained his vigil. The fire needed constant tending, and Eleanor needed regular monitoring. Twice he had to rewarm her hands and feet, rubbing circulation back into them. Once she stirred, eyes fluttering open to reveal irises the color of summer cornflowers, startlingly bright against her pale face. "Rest," Nathan said softly when panic flickered across her features. "You're safe." Whether from his words or simple exhaustion, she slipped back into unconsciousness. But her breathing had steadied, her pulse strengthened. She would survive the night, Nathan was increasingly certain. What came after, when she woke to find herself alone with a man the town of Willow Creek considered barely human, was another matter entirely. Outside, the waters continued to rise as the storm showed no signs of abating. And in Willow Creek, 5 miles distant, a search party was undoubtedly forming. Eleanor Parker, Nathan had already surmised from her journal, was expected, important, connected, which meant that by morning, his peaceful existence on the edge of society would be shattered forever, one way or another. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Eleanor Parker awoke to the sound of a man's voice, low, steady, and completely unfamiliar. Her eyes opened to a rough timber ceiling, golden morning light filtering through cracks. The pain hit her immediately, throbbing in her temple, fire in her right arm, and a bone-deep ache that seemed to have no specific source. "Don't try to move yet," the voice said. "Your arm is broken, and you've lost blood." She turned her head. Slowly, every movement sending fresh waves of pain crashing through her skull. The man who had spoken sat cross-legged beside a small fire. His appearance sent a jolt of alarm through her. Dark copper skin, high cheekbones, black hair pulled back with a leather cord. But his eyes caught and held her attention. Clear amber, intelligent, watchful. He wore a white shirt, sleeve cuffs rolled to the elbows, and a black vest. Both were stained with mud and what looked disturbingly like blood. Her blood, she realized. "Who?" Her voice cracked, throat raw. "Dr. Nathan Blackwood," he said, reaching for a canteen. "I pulled you from Cottonwood Creek during the flood yesterday." He moved slowly, deliberately, as if afraid of startling her. "Can you drink?" Eleanor hesitated, but thirst overcame suspicion. She nodded weakly. He supported her head with a surprisingly gentle hand, helping her take small sips of cool water. The simple act exhausted her, but she fought to maintain consciousness, needing answers. "The flood," she whispered. "My wagon." "Gone," he said simply. "Your horse too, I'm afraid. You're lucky to be alive, Miss Parker." That caught her attention. "You know my name?" A flicker of something. Wariness crossed his features. "Your journal survived the water. I needed to know who you were, in case—" He didn't finish the thought, but Eleanor understood. In case she died under his care. "How bad?" she asked, gesturing weakly to her injuries. "Broken radius, the smaller bone in your forearm, 7 stitches. To your temple. Numerous contusions, mild hypothermia, and likely a concussion." His clinical assessment was delivered with professional detachment. "The break is clean. I've set and splinted it properly. You'll keep the arm, but you'll need to rest it for at least 6 weeks." Eleanor processed this information slowly, her mind still foggy. "You're really a doctor?" Something hardened in his expression. "Yale Medical School, class of 71. Though some in these parts prefer to focus on the Apache half of my heritage rather than the MD after my name." Shame heated Eleanor's cheeks at the implied rebuke. She deserved it, she supposed. "I'm sorry, that was ungrateful." You saved my life." He nodded once, accepting her apology without comment. "The storm has passed, but the valley's still flooded. We're stranded here for at least another day until the waters recede enough to reach my cabin." He hesitated. "People will be looking for you in Willow Creek. I have no way to let them know you're safe." Eleanor closed her eyes briefly. Uncle William would be frantic. She'd been expected yesterday afternoon. Her last letter had been quite specific about her arrival date. After traveling all the way from Boston, she'd been so close. "Are we far from town?" she asked. "5 miles as the crow flies, but with the flooding it might as well be 50. Nathan stood, moving to the open side of the shelter to survey the landscape. "Half the valley's under water." Eleanor followed his gaze, seeing for the first time the devastation beyond their shelter. What had been a scenic valley was now a vast, muddy lake stretching to the horizon. Trees stood half submerged and debris floated everywhere. The reality of her narrow escape hit her anew. "Thank you," she said, the words wholly inadequate. "For risking your life." He turned, studying her with those unsettling amber eyes. "I'm a doctor, Miss Parker. I don't choose who to save based on convenience or consequence." There was history beneath those words. Painful history, Eleanor suspected. But before she could respond, a wave of dizziness washed over her. Nathan was at her side instantly, his fingers at her wrist, checking her pulse. "Rest," he instructed. "Your body needs to recover. We have nowhere to be until the waters recede." Despite her desire to protest, to assert her independence, Eleanor found herself slipping back into darkness, her body betraying her mind's stubborn determination. Nathan watched Eleanor Parker return to sleep, troubled by what the coming days would bring. Her presence complicated everything. He'd built a careful life here, serving those who needed him, avoiding those who despised him, maintaining a fragile peace with the town that never fully accepted him as one of their own. All that would change now. William Parker was not just any citizen of Willow Creek. As the town's founder and primary investor in the new silver mine, his influence was absolute. And if the journal was to be believed, Eleanor was his niece, summoned from Boston to bring civilization to the frontier town. Nathan doubted that civilization included being rescued by a half-Apache doctor with a reputation that was questionable. At best, in the eyes of men like William Parker, he checked her splint and bandages one more time, then stepped outside the shelter to assess the flooding. The water had receded slightly overnight, but still rendered the valley impassable. From this vantage point, he could just make out the smoke rising from Willow Creek's chimneys in the distance. By now, search parties would be combing every accessible trail. If the water dropped quickly enough, they might reach the shelter by nightfall. If not, he'd have to spend another night alone with Eleanor Parker. A scenario that could destroy his reputation regardless of how honorably he behaved. Nathan sighed, running a hand through his hair. 7 years of building a practice here, of proving himself through competence and dedication, could be undone in an instant by rumors and suspicion. A movement across the flooded valley caught his eye. Riders, 3 of them, picking their way carefully along the higher ground of the western ridge. The search party had begun, as he'd known it would. But they were heading in the wrong direction, moving away from the shelter. Nathan calculated. Quickly, if he climbed to the peak of the eastern ridge, he might be visible enough to signal them. But that would mean leaving Eleanor alone, potentially for hours. As a doctor, his first responsibility was to his patient. As a man viewed with suspicion by most of Willow Creek, his responsibility was to himself, to protect the life he'd built, against the prejudice that constantly threatened to upend it. "Damn it," he muttered, making his decision. He gathered dried branches, anything that would burn bright enough to be seen at a distance. If he couldn't go to them, he'd make them come to him. by the time he'd assembled a proper signal fire on. The ridge above the shelter, the riders had disappeared from view. Nathan lit the fire anyway, feeding it green leaves to produce as much smoke as possible. Then he settled in to wait, dividing his attention between watching for returning searchers and checking on his patient. Eleanor slept fitfully through most of the day, waking occasionally for water or to shift position. Each time Nathan explained where he was going and why, ensuring she wouldn't panic if she woke to find him absent. She seemed to accept his care with quiet dignity, asking few questions. It was mid-afternoon when the sound of voices carried across the valley. The search party had spotted his smoke signal and was making its way toward them, taking a circuitous route around the worst of the flooding. Nathan returned to the shelter, knowing he had little time to prepare Eleanor for what was coming. "Miss Parker," he said gently, waking her, "there are riders approaching. Your uncle's men, I believe." She blinked away sleep, wincing as she tried to sit up. "You found them?" "Signal fire," he explained, helping her into a more upright position. "They'll be here within the hour." He hesitated, then forged ahead. "Miss Parker, I need to ask something of you." Eleanor's blue eyes focused on him, suddenly alert despite her injuries. "Yes?" "The men coming, they will have certain assumptions. When they find you here with me..." He forced himself to maintain eye contact, refusing to show the discomfort he felt. "I've treated you as a doctor treats any patient, nothing more." Understanding dawned in her expression. "You're worried they'll think otherwise because of your heritage." Nathan nodded once, appreciating her directness. "Your uncle is an influential man in Willow Creek. His opinion could determine whether I can continue my practice here." "You want me to tell them the truth," Eleanor said, "that you saved my life and treated me with complete propriety?" "Yes." She studied him, her gaze far too perceptive for his comfort. "Is that truly all you're worried about, Dr. Blackwood? That they might think you've been improper?" Nathan's jaw tightened. She was more astute than he'd given her credit for. "No. Some in town would prefer a reason to run me out entirely, or worse. Because you're half Apache? Because I exist in a space they don't believe I have the right to occupy." The bitterness he usually kept carefully controlled slipped into his voice. "A half-breed with an education, treating their wives and children, knowing their weaknesses and secrets." He looked away. "It makes certain men uncomfortable." Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried a steel that surprised him. "I will tell them exactly what happened, Dr. Blackwood, that you risked your life to save mine when no one else could have, that your medical skill is the only reason I'm alive." She reached out with her uninjured hand, touching his arm lightly. "And I will make sure my uncle understands. His niece is in your debt." The sincerity in her voice caught him off guard. Nathan had expected cooperation. She seemed a decent woman after all. But not this fierce declaration of support. Before he could respond, shouts echoed from below. The riders had spotted the shelter. "That would be your rescue party," Nathan said, moving away from her touch. "I should go meet them, explain the situation before they arrive." As he stepped toward the shelter's entrance, Eleanor called after him. "Dr. Blackwood?" He turned. "Thank you, not just for saving me, but for..." She gestured to her splintered arm, her bandaged head. "For putting aside whatever treatment you've received in the past to care for a stranger who might have been just as prejudiced as those you fear." Nathan nodded once, uncomfortable with her gratitude and unsure how to respond to the compassion in her eyes. Then he stepped outside to meet the men who would undoubtedly view his heroism as suspicious at best, criminal at worst. Just another day as the half-Apache doctor of Willow Creek. The search party consisted of 3 men: Sheriff Thomas Mills, a barrel-chested man with a bristling mustache and perpetually narrowed eyes; Jack Wilson, the livery stable owner whose weathered face had seen 40 hard Colorado winters; and Franklin Reed, foreman of William Parker's mining operation. Nathan recognized them all, had treated them all at one point or another. None had ever thanked him. Nathan stood with his hands visible at his sides as they approached, Sheriff Mills's hand resting casually on his holstered revolver. "Blackwood," Mills acknowledged with a curt nod. "Got your signal. Didn't expect to find you. Out here, I was gathering herbs when the storm hit," Nathan explained evenly. "Witnessed Miss Parker's wagon get caught in the flash flood at Cottonwood Crossing." Reed dismounted, his boots squelching in the mud. "Parker's niece. She's alive." The surprise in his voice suggested they'd been searching more for a body than a survivor. "Yes, broken arm, head wound, various contusions. She's inside." Nathan gestured toward the shelter. "I've been caring for her since yesterday afternoon." The three men exchanged glances laden with unspoken implications. "Been alone with her all this time, have you?" Wilson asked, his tone making the question far from innocent. Nathan felt a familiar burn of anger rise in his chest, but kept his expression neutral. "I've been treating her injuries as any doctor would. She's been unconscious for most of it." Sheriff Mills studied him for a long moment. "We'll take her from here, Blackwood. Parker's half out of his mind with worry." "She shouldn't be moved roughly," Nathan cautioned. "The arm is set, but—" "We know how to handle an injured woman," Reed interrupted, pushing past Nathan toward the shelter. The other men followed, effectively dismissing him. Nathan stayed where he was, counting breaths to maintain his composure. This was exactly what he'd expected, exactly what he'd warned Eleanor about. To these men, his medical expertise was secondary to their assumptions about his character. Voices drifted from the shelter, Reed's surprise, Eleanor's measured response, too quiet to make out the exact words. Nathan found himself straining to hear whether she was keeping her promise to defend him. After several minutes, Sheriff Mills emerged, his expression unreadable. "Miss Parker says you pulled her from the flood, says you likely saved her life." Nathan nodded once. "It was fortunate I was in the right position to reach her." Mills tugged at his mustache, clearly uncomfortable. "She's insisting you accompany us back to town. Says she won't be moved without your medical supervision." Surprise flickered through Nathan. He hadn't expected Eleanor to be quite so forceful in her defense. "Her injuries are serious, but not life-threatening if proper care is taken during transport. That's what Reed told her. She's not having it." Mills shrugged. "Parker women are known for their stubbornness, apparently." Nathan weighed his options. Returning to town with them meant facing William Parker directly, a confrontation he'd avoided for years, despite treating many of the man's employees. But refusing Eleanor's request would only fuel suspicions about his motives. "I'll need to gather my supplies," he said finally. Mills nodded. "Make it quick. We've got a long ride ahead, what with having to skirt the worst of the flooding." Inside the shelter, Eleanor sat propped against the wall, her face pale but determined. Reed and Wilson hovered nearby, looking distinctly uncomfortable. "Dr. Blackwood," she said, voice stronger than it had been earlier. "I've informed these gentlemen that I won't be moved without your supervision. My uncle can send his fancy carriage once we reach passable roads, but until then I insist you oversee my transport." Nathan understood her strategy immediately. By making her request public and framing it as medical necessity, she was providing him protection against the very suspicions he'd feared. "As your doctor, I agree that's wise," he said carefully. "The break is still fresh, and the terrain will be challenging." Reed looked like he'd bitten into something sour. "Sheriff's gone to arrange the horses. We'll need to double up since we've only got 3 mounts." "Miss Parker will ride with me," Nathan said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I'll need to monitor her condition and ensure the splint remains stable." Wilson opened his mouth as if to protest, then closed it at Eleanor's sharp glance. These Boston women were a different breed entirely from the frontier wives he was accustomed to. Nathan gathered his medical supplies with efficient movements, packing away herbs and bandages. He'd lost his spare coat, sacrificed to keep Eleanor warm during the night, but the spring day was mild enough now that he wouldn't miss it. "Dr. Blackwood," Eleanor called softly as the two other men stepped outside. "I meant what I said earlier. They won't be running you out of town over this. Not if I have anything to say about it." Nathan paused in his packing. "That's generous, Miss Parker, but you don't understand the dynamics at play here. Your uncle, my uncle raised me after my parents died," she interrupted. "He knows my judgment is sound, even with a concussion." A ghost of a smile touched her lips, especially when it comes to recognizing a decent man who's being judged unfairly. Before Nathan could respond, Sheriff Mills called from outside, announcing, "The horses were ready." The journey to Willow Creek tested both Eleanor's endurance and Nathan's patience. Despite his medical expertise, the other men insisted on frequent stops to check on the lady, each time implying through looks and subtle comments that they didn't trust him alone with her. Eleanor, true to her word, rebuffed their concerns with increasing irritation. "Gentlemen," she said during their third unnecessary halt, "if you question Dr. Blackwood's care one more time, I shall begin to think you're deliberately trying to aggravate my condition with these constant delays." Nathan, sitting apart from the group as he always did, couldn't suppress a small smile at her spirited defense. Eleanor Parker was proving to be far more than the delicate Eastern flower he'd initially taken her for. By the time the buildings of Willow Creek appeared on the horizon, dusk was settling over the valley. They'd traveled a circuitous route, adding miles to avoid the flooding, and Eleanor was clearly exhausted, her body sagging against Nathan's as they rode. "Not much further," he murmured, supporting her with one arm. "Your uncle's house is on the north end of town, best one in Willow Creek." "I've never met him," she admitted softly. "Not in person. He and my father had a falling out before I was born. When Father and Mother died of influenza last year, his letters started coming, offering a home, a fresh start." Nathan nodded, understanding, dawning. "And now you're the prodigal niece, returning to the family fold." "Something like that." Her voice grew fainter, "though I'm not sure this is the arrival he envisioned for his respectable Bostonian relation." The first buildings of Willow Creek loomed ahead. Thompson's Saloon, Gravely's General Store, the assayer's office. Even at this hour, the town hummed with activity. News of the search party's return had clearly spread. People gathered on porches and boardwalks, watching their approach with undisguised curiosity. Nathan felt the familiar weight of their stares, heavier now, with Eleanor Parker held carefully in his arms. He kept his gaze fixed straight ahead, face impassive, as he'd learned to do years ago. Show nothing, react to nothing, give them no ammunition for their prejudice. Sheriff Mills led them down Main Street toward the imposing two-story house at the north end. The only building in town with a proper slate roof and glass windows, imported all the way from St. Louis. On the wide front porch stood a tall, distinguished-looking man with silver hair and a neatly trimmed beard, William Parker. Even at a distance, Nathan could see the family resemblance, the same straight nose, the same determined set of the jaw. But where Eleanor's eyes held compassion, her uncle's held only calculation as he watched their approach. "Eleanor!" Parker called, rushing down the steps as they reached the house. "Thank God!" Nathan helped Eleanor dismount carefully, supporting her weight as her knees buckled slightly. Parker reached for her, but stopped short at the sight of her bandaged head and splinted arm. "What happened?" he demanded, gaze shifting accusingly to Nathan. "Who is this man?" "Uncle William," Eleanor said, her voice stronger than Nathan expected after the grueling journey. "This is Dr. Nathan Blackwood. He saved my life when my wagon was caught in the flash flood. He's been caring for my injuries since yesterday." Parker's eyes narrowed as he took in Nathan's appearance, the copper skin, the black hair. Recognition dawned. Blackwood, the half-breed doctor from the South Ridge. Nathan felt Eleanor stiffen beside him but kept his own expression neutral. "Yes, sir. Your niece has a broken radius and a concussion, along with various contusions. She'll need rest and careful monitoring for the next few days." "We have a town doctor," Parker said dismissively. "Dr. Stevens can take over from here." "Stevens is a butcher with a medical license," Sheriff Mills muttered, surprising Nathan with the unexpected support. "Begging your pardon, Mr. Parker, but if Miss Eleanor's gotten this far with Blackwood's treatment, might be best to let him finish what he started." Parker looked as if he'd swallowed something distasteful, but Eleanor swayed suddenly, her face going even paler. Nathan caught her before she could fall. "This discussion can wait," he said firmly. "Miss Parker needs to lie down immediately. The journey has taken a toll." For a moment, Parker looked as if he might argue further, but concern for his niece overrode his prejudice. "Bring her inside," he relented, stepping aside. As Nathan carried Eleanor up the porch steps and into the Parker mansion, he was acutely aware of crossing a threshold few people of his heritage had ever been invited to cross. The fine furnishings, the crystal chandelier in the entryway, the Turkish carpets imported from Europe, all spoke of wealth that set William Parker apart from the rest of Willow Creek, as surely as Nathan's mixed blood set him apart. "This way," Parker directed, leading them to a bedroom on the first floor, a guest room judging by the impersonal decor. "Her trunk arrived by stage last week. Martha laid out fresh clothes, assuming—" He trailed off, the implication clear. "Assuming Eleanor would arrive uninjured and conscious." Nathan laid Eleanor gently on the bed. She caught his hand as he began to step away. "Thank you, Dr. Blackwood," she said, loud enough for her uncle to hear. "I owe you my life, and I won't forget it." The declaration hung in the air between them, a promise, a challenge, and perhaps something more that Nathan wasn't prepared to examine too closely. "Rest, Miss Parker," he said simply. "I'll return tomorrow to check your progress." As he turned to leave, he found himself face to face with William Parker, whose expression had shifted from hostility to something more complex. Calculation, assessment, and the faintest hint of reluctant gratitude. "A word before you go, Doctor," Parker said, gesturing to the hallway. Nathan nodded once, glancing back at Eleanor, whose eyes were already drifting closed with exhaustion. Whatever Parker had to say, whether thanks or threats, would not change what had happened between the half-Apache doctor and the Boston lady during those hours alone in the wilderness. Some bonds, once formed, could not be easily broken, not even by the most powerful man in Willow Creek. "My study," William Parker said, gesturing down the hallway with a stiffness that suggested he was unused to being disobeyed. Nathan followed silently, taking in the wealth displayed on every wall. Framed paintings of European landscapes, a grandfather, clock that must have cost a small fortune to transport to this remote corner of Colorado, display cases filled with various geological specimens that undoubtedly came from Parker's mines. The study was a masculine sanctuary of leather and mahogany. Parker closed the door behind them, moving to a sideboard where crystal decanters caught the lamplight. "Whiskey," he offered, already pouring himself a generous measure. "No, thank you," Nathan replied. He remained standing, though Parker had not invited him to sit. Parker knocked back half his drink in one swallow, then turned to face Nathan directly. "Sheriff Mills tells me you pulled my niece from the floodwaters yourself, that she would have drowned otherwise." "The current was strong," Nathan said simply. "Anyone would have done the same. But no one else was there, were they?" Parker studied him over the rim of his glass. "Just you. Convenient." The implication hung in the air, ugly and unmistakable. Nathan felt his jaw tighten, but kept his expression neutral. "If you're suggesting I had something to do with the flash flood that nearly killed your niece, Mr. Parker, I think we're done here." He turned to leave, but Parker's next words stopped him. "My brother James was always the idealist in the family." Parker said, almost conversationally. Always championing lost causes and unpopular ideas. Eleanor seems to have inherited that particular trait. He set down his glass with a sharp click. She clearly thinks highly of you. Nathan turned back slowly. Miss Parker is grateful for medical care, nothing more. Parker's lips twisted in what might have been amusement. You don't know Parker women very well, Doctor. They don't express mere gratitude by defying 3 men to insist on your continued attendance. They're stubborn that way, once their mind is set. Nathan wasn't sure where this conversation was heading, but instinct told him to proceed with caution. What exactly are you trying to say, Mr. Parker? I'm saying that my niece's reputation is of paramount importance to me. Parker refilled his glass. She's traveled all the way from Boston to make a new start here. The right connections, the right marriage, these things matter in a town like Willow Creek. And you're worried that being rescued by a half-breed has somehow tainted her, Nathan stated flatly. Parker didn't flinch at the bluntness. I'm worried that people talk, Doctor, and in small towns, talk becomes truth faster than you can imagine. Your concern is noted. Nathan turned to leave again. I'll send Dr. Stevens to check on her tomorrow, since my services are clearly unwelcome. I didn't say that. Parker's voice stopped him once more. In fact, I want to propose an arrangement. Nathan raised an eyebrow, waiting. You will continue to treat Eleanor until she's fully recovered, Parker said. You will visit this house at precisely 2 o'clock each afternoon, when Martha and the housekeeper are present as chaperones. You will not be alone with my niece at any time. You will not discuss anything beyond her medical condition. And in exchange? Nathan asked. Sensing there was more, Parker smiled thinly. In exchange, I will personally ensure that the town council approves your petition for the land adjacent to your cabin, the land you've been trying to purchase for your medicinal garden for the past 3 years. Nathan stared at him, genuinely surprised. How did you know about that? I make it my business to know everything that happens in Willow Creek, Doctor. Parker sipped his whiskey. The council has been blocking your petition at my request. I can remove that obstacle with a word. The admission of such casual manipulation should have angered Nathan, but instead he found himself curious. Why the change of heart? Let's call it payment for services rendered, Parker replied smoothly. You saved my only living relative. That deserves compensation. But Nathan knew there was more to it. William Parker didn't become the most powerful man in 3 counties by being sentimental. And it keeps me under your control while Eleanor recovers, he deduced. Visiting at set times, observed by your staff, playing by your rules, all to prevent gossip. Parker's smile widened fractionally. You're quicker than most give you credit for, Blackwood. Yes, this arrangement benefits us both. You get your land. I protect my niece's reputation. Seems fair, doesn't it? Nathan considered the offer. Yes, the additional acreage would allow him to cultivate rare medicinal plants that currently required long treks into the mountains to harvest. It would expand his practice, help more patients, but accepting meant playing into Parker's manipulations, becoming another pawn in whatever game the man was orchestrating. I'll consider it, Nathan said finally, but my treatment of Miss Parker isn't contingent on your approval of my land petition. I took an oath to care for the sick, regardless of circumstance. Parker set down his glass, studying Nathan with new interest. Admirable principles, Doctor. I look forward to seeing how firmly you hold to them in the coming weeks. He moved to the door, opening it in clear dismissal. 2 o'clock tomorrow, don't be late. Word spread through Willow Creek with the efficiency of a telegraph wire. By morning, everyone knew that William Parker's niece had arrived half dead after a flash flood, rescued by the half-Apache doctor from the South Ridge. By noon, 3 different versions of the story circulated, one casting Nathan as a heroic savior, another suggesting he'd staged the rescue to ingratiate himself with the powerful Parker family, and a third hinting at improprieties during their time alone in the wilderness. Nathan heard the whispers as he tended to Mrs. Hollister's arthritic hands, saw the sidelong glances as he purchased supplies at Gravely's store, felt the weight of scrutiny as he rode through town toward his afternoon appointment at the Parker mansion. Martha, the stern-faced housekeeper, met him at the door with a look that suggested she'd sooner welcome a rattlesnake into the house. "Miss Parker is awake," she said without preamble. "Mr. Parker is at the mine but will return shortly. I'll be present for the examination." Nathan nodded, having expected nothing less. "How is she this morning? Any fever, disorientation?" "She's been asking for you," Martha admitted reluctantly. "Refused breakfast until we promised you'd be coming at 2. She led him through the house to Eleanor's room, knocking sharply before entering. Eleanor sat propped against pillows, her broken arm carefully positioned on a cushion, her golden hair brushed and arranged to cover the bandage at her temple. Despite the injuries, she looked remarkably composed, more the Boston society lady today than the half-drowned victim he'd pulled from the flood. "Dr. Blackwood," she greeted him, a genuine smile warming her features. "Right on time." "Miss Parker," he acknowledged with a slight bow. "How are you feeling today?" "Like I've been trampled by a herd of buffalo," she admitted with surprising candor, "but considerably better than yesterday." Nathan set his medical bag on the bedside table, aware of Martha hovering by the door, watching every movement. "Any dizziness, nausea, difficulty focusing your eyes?" "Some dizziness when I try to stand," Eleanor replied, "and the light hurts my eyes a bit, but I managed to keep down some broth at midday." Nathan nodded, pleased with the progress. "That's to be expected with a concussion. The symptoms should improve over the next few days." He examined her pupils, checking for equal response to light, then carefully unwrapped the bandage at her temple to inspect the stitches. "The wound is clean, no signs of infection. You'll have a small scar, but your hair will cover it once healed." "I've never been particularly vain," Eleanor said with a slight smile. "A scar seems a small price to pay for survival." Nathan found himself returning her smile before remembering Martha's watchful presence. He quickly schooled his features back to professional detachment. "I'll need to check the alignment of the splint. May I?" Eleanor extended her injured arm with a small wince. Nathan's fingers moved gently over the splint, making minor adjustments where the padding had compressed during the night. "The bone is set correctly," he said. "You'll need to keep it immobilized for at least 4 weeks, possibly 6. I'll fashion a proper sling before I leave today." "Uncle William says I should thank you properly for saving my life," Eleanor said, her eyes never leaving his face, "though he seems to think words are insufficient for such a debt." Nathan glanced toward Martha, who made no attempt to hide her eavesdropping. "No thanks are necessary, Miss Parker. As I told your uncle, anyone would have done the same." "But no one else did," Eleanor persisted. "No one else was there. No one else would have known how to set a broken arm or stitch a head. Wound." Her voice lowered slightly. "Uncle William doesn't understand what happened out there, what you risked." Nathan busied himself preparing a fresh bandage for her temple. "Perhaps it's better that way," he said quietly. "Some experiences aren't meant to be shared beyond those who lived them." Eleanor's eyes widened slightly at his words, understanding their deeper meaning, what had transpired between them in that small shelter, the vulnerability, the trust, the breaking down of barriers, was theirs alone, not for the gossips of Willow Creek to dissect and distort. "Dr. Blackwood," she said, matching his professional tone, "when might I be able to venture outdoors? I've come all this way to see the frontier, only to find myself confined to bed." "Fresh air would be beneficial," he replied, "but you should avoid exertion for at least another week. Perhaps short walks in the garden with assistance. Would you be willing to accompany me tomorrow?" she asked. "I have so many questions about the local plants and their medicinal properties. Uncle William mentioned you maintain quite an extensive herb garden." Before Nathan could respond, Martha stepped forward. "Miss Parker, I'm sure Dr. Blackwood has many patients requiring his attention. Mr. Reed would be happy to escort you when you're well enough." Eleanor's smile never faltered, but something flashed in her eyes, a determination that Nathan was beginning to recognize. "How fortunate that I already have a doctor in attendance who can monitor my condition while satisfying my botanical curiosity. 2 o'clock tomorrow in the garden, Dr. Blackwood." Put that way, with Martha as witness, Nathan could hardly refuse without appearing unprofessional. "If your condition continues to improve, a short walk tomorrow would be acceptable," he conceded, finishing with her bandage. "Now I need to make a proper sling for your arm." As he worked, fashioning a supportive sling from clean linen, William Parker's warning echoed in his mind. Parker women were stubborn once their minds were set, and Eleanor Parker's mind seemed increasingly set on forging a connection with the half-Apache doctor that went beyond patient and physician. The realization was both exhilarating and dangerous. In Willow Creek, such a connection could only end one way, badly, for both of them. "There," Nathan said, adjusting the final knot of the sling. "This should provide better support than the temporary one." "Thank you," Eleanor said, her fingers briefly brushing his as she tested the arrangement. For everything, the simple touch, the warmth in her eyes, the implied meaning behind her words, all sent a warning through Nathan as clear as a rattlesnake's rattle. Eleanor Parker was not simply a grateful patient, and his own reaction to her, the quickening of his pulse, the heightened awareness of her presence, went far beyond professional concern. "Rest, Miss Parker," he said, stepping back and gathering his supplies. "I'll see you tomorrow." As he left the Parker mansion, Nathan knew he was walking into a situation more dangerous than any flash flood. Water merely threatened his life. Eleanor Parker threatened his carefully constructed world, his hard-won place in Willow Creek, and the walls he'd built around his heart after years of rejection and prejudice. Yet somehow he found himself looking forward to 2 o'clock tomorrow with an anticipation he hadn't felt in years. The Parker Mansion's garden was the only one of its kind in Willow Creek. A half-acre of imported flowers, ornamental trees, and carefully tended vegetable beds that seemed to defy the harsh Colorado climate. A cobblestone path wound through roses that wouldn't bloom for months yet, past a small pond where water lilies would eventually flourish. Nathan arrived precisely at 2 o'clock, as stipulated by William Parker's conditions. He found Eleanor, already seated on a wrought-iron bench beneath a budding pear tree, a shawl draped carefully over her shoulders despite the mild spring afternoon. Martha hovered nearby, ostensibly pruning roses, but clearly positioned to oversee their interaction. "Miss Parker," Nathan greeted her, medical bag in hand. "I see you're taking advantage of the fine weather." Eleanor's smile brightened her pale features. "Dr. Blackwood." "Yes, Martha helped me dress and come outside an hour ago. The fresh air is exactly the tonic I needed." Nathan noted the high color in her cheeks, the steadier gaze. Definite improvements from yesterday. "How's the pain today? Any increase in headache or dizziness?" "Less of both," she replied, "though this," she gestured to her splintered arm, "itches terribly beneath the bindings." "That's actually a good sign," Nathan said, setting his bag down. "It means healing has begun. Try not to disturb the splint, no matter how maddening the sensation becomes." Eleanor nodded, then glanced meaningfully at Martha before lowering her voice. "Do you suppose we might walk a little? I've been sitting so long my legs are beginning to feel like tree stumps." Nathan hesitated, aware of the housekeeper's suspicious gaze. "A short walk would be beneficial to your circulation." He conceded, "But we'll stay within sight of the house." "Of course," Eleanor agreed readily. "I wouldn't dream of taxing your professional boundaries, Doctor." There was a spark of mischief in her eyes that both concerned and intrigued him. This woman was far too intelligent and far too perceptive for his peace of mind. He offered his arm for support, which she took with her uninjured hand. Martha straightened immediately, shears poised mid-cut. "Just to the pond and back, Martha," Eleanor called reassuringly. "Dr. Blackwood is concerned about my balance after the concussion." The housekeeper's lips thinned to a disapproving line, but she nodded stiffly and returned to her pruning, though her attention remained fixed on them. They walked slowly, Eleanor leaning on Nathan's arm more than he suspected she actually needed to. The connection between them, her small hand resting in the crook of his elbow, her shoulder occasionally brushing his, felt both unsettling and oddly right, as if they'd walked together this way dozens of times before. "Your uncle has quite an impressive garden," Nathan observed, filling the silence. "A futile attempt to recreate the East, out here in the wilds," Eleanor replied with surprising candor. "Uncle William tries to impose his will on everything, even nature." She glanced up at him. "Is it true he's been blocking your purchase of additional land?" Nathan tensed slightly. "You've been making inquiries." "I've been listening," she corrected. "People talk quite freely around a bedridden woman, assuming I'm either asleep or too addled to understand. It seems my uncle holds considerable sway over the town council. Your uncle built this town," Nathan said diplomatically. "His influence is significant." They reached the small pond, where Eleanor paused, gazing at the still water reflecting the blue Colorado sky. "He offered you the land in exchange for treating me, didn't he?" Nathan stared at her, momentarily speechless. "How did you—" "As I said, people talk. Martha and the cook were discussing it this morning." A shadow crossed her face. "I don't appreciate being used as a bargaining chip, Dr. Blackwood." "It wasn't my idea," Nathan said quietly. "And I haven't accepted his offer." This seemed to surprise her. "Why not? From what I understand, you've been trying to acquire that parcel for years." Nathan considered his answer carefully. "Because accepting would suggest I wouldn't have treated you otherwise, that I require special incentives to fulfill my oath as a physician." He met her gaze directly. "I don't." Eleanor studied him for a long moment, her blue eyes searching his face, as if seeking confirmation of something she'd already begun to suspect. "You're not what I expected to find in Willow Creek, Dr. Blackwood." "I could say the same about you, Miss Parker." A small smile tugged at her lips. "I imagine most Boston socialites don't arrive half-drowned and broken." "I was thinking more of your willingness to defend a half-Apache doctor against your uncle's prejudice," Nathan said quietly. "That's uncommon in these parts." Eleanor turned her gaze back to the pond, her expression suddenly distant. "My father was considered uncommon, too. A wealthy Boston merchant who vocally opposed slavery, who funded schools for freed people after the war." Her voice softened. "It cost him socially, even financially toward the end, but he never wavered from his conviction that all people deserve equal treatment under both law and custom." "Your father sounds like a remarkable man." He was. She looked up at him again, that same determined light in her eyes. "I may have his blood, but I'm still finding my way toward his courage. Coming west was part of that journey, breaking away from Boston society and its suffocating conventions." Nathan felt a prickle of warning at the back of his neck. "Miss Parker—" "Eleanor," she interrupted, "please, at least when we're not being observed quite so carefully." She nodded toward Martha, who had mysteriously migrated to pruning bushes. "Closer to the pond, Eleanor," he conceded, lowering his voice. "I think you should understand something. Your uncle isn't the only obstacle in Willow Creek. My position here is precarious. I'm tolerated because I'm useful, nothing more." "Then they're fools," she said with startling fierceness. You're the most competent doctor I've ever encountered, and I grew up surrounded by Boston's finest physicians." The compliment caught him off guard, warming him in ways he hadn't expected. Nevertheless, any association between us beyond doctor and patient would be viewed with suspicion at best, hostility at worst. Eleanor's eyes narrowed slightly. "Are you warning me away from friendship with you, Dr. Blackwood?" "I'm suggesting caution," he replied. Carefully. "For both our sakes." "Noted," she said, though her tone suggested his warning had only strengthened her resolve. "Shall we continue our walk? I believe I promised Martha we'd stay within sight of the house." They completed their circuit of the garden in thoughtful silence, each absorbing the implications of their conversation. As they approached the bench, where they'd started, Nathan spotted a familiar figure waiting on the back porch of the mansion, William Parker himself, watching their progress with undisguised interest. "Your uncle has returned," Nathan observed, instinctively straightening his posture. Eleanor sighed softly. "Right on schedule, I'm sure. He's been checking the clock every 5 minutes since you were first expected yesterday." Parker descended the porch steps as they neared, his expression a carefully constructed mask of geniality. "Eleanor, my dear, you're looking much improved today, and Dr. Blackwood, prompt as always." "Uncle William," Eleanor greeted him with a practiced smile. "Dr. Blackwood has been explaining the native plants of the region. Did you know that the scrubby bush by the garden wall has powerful analgesic properties? Quite fascinating." Parker's gaze flicked between them, assessing. "Indeed, I wasn't aware our garden tour included a botany lesson." "All plants have potential medicinal applications," Nathan said smoothly. "As a doctor, I find it relevant to Miss Parker's recovery to discuss natural remedies that might supplement her treatment." "How convenient," Parker replied with a thin smile. "Speaking of convenience, Doctor, I've been in communication with the town council this morning. Your land petition has been reconsidered. The vote is scheduled for next Monday's meeting." The implication was clear. Parker was fulfilling his end of the bargain, regardless of whether Nathan had explicitly accepted the arrangement. "That's very generous of you, Uncle," Eleanor said, before Nathan could respond. "Dr. Blackwood was just telling me about his plans for an expanded medicinal garden, such an asset to the community." Parker's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Yes, well, it seems the least we can do after his assistance during your unfortunate arrival." He turned to Nathan. "I wonder if I might have a private word with you, Doctor. Eleanor, Martha will help you back to your room for some rest." Eleanor opened her mouth as if to protest, but caught Nathan's warning glance. "Of course, Uncle. Fresh air has quite tired me out." She turned to Nathan. "Tomorrow at 2 again, Dr. Blackwood." "If your condition continues to improve," he replied with professional detachment. Martha appeared immediately to escort Eleanor. Inside, though the young woman managed one last meaningful glance over her shoulder, equal parts apology and encouragement, before disappearing into the house. Parker waited until they were alone before speaking. "Walk with me, Doctor." He gestured toward the far corner of the garden, where a wrought-iron table and chairs sat beneath a budding apple tree. Once seated, he fixed Nathan with a calculating stare. "You seem to be developing quite a rapport with my niece." Nathan kept his expression neutral. "Miss Parker is an intelligent woman with an interest in medicine. It makes our consultations more productive." "Indeed." Parker steepled his fingers. "And these consultations have strayed into botany lessons and garden strolls. Tell me, Doctor, do you treat all your patients with such personal attention?" "I adjust my approach based on each patient's needs," Nathan replied evenly. "Miss Parker benefits from gentle exercise and mental stimulation as she recovers." Parker studied him for a long moment. "Let me be direct, Blackwood. I've built something significant here in Willow Creek, a respectable community with a promising future. Eleanor represents the culmination of that effort, bringing Eastern refinement and connections to our frontier town. She seems capable of fulfilling whatever role you've envisioned for her, Nathan said carefully. She's young, Parker countered. Idealistic. Her father filled her head with all manner of progressive notions that may have been fashionable in Boston drawing rooms but have no place in a mining town trying to establish itself. He leaned forward slightly. Eleanor needs guidance to find her proper place here, the right associations, the right husband eventually. Nathan felt a cold knot form in his stomach. And you're concerned that I'm interfering with those plans? I'm concerned, Parker said with deliberate precision, that my niece's gratitude toward you might be developing into something inappropriate, something that could damage her prospects and standing in this community before she's even properly established herself. I've given her no encouragement in that direction, Nathan stated firmly. Parker's smile didn't reach his eyes. You may not have intended to, but I saw how she looked at you just now. Eleanor has her father's unfortunate tendency to champion the outcast, to deliberately align herself with those society has rejected. He sighed as if genuinely regretful. I won't have her ruining her future on some misguided principle, Doctor. The implication was clear. Nathan himself was the outcast, the potential ruin of Eleanor Parker's future. What exactly are you asking of me, Mr. Parker? Nathan asked, though he already knew the answer. Complete your treatment of her injuries with all due professionalism, Parker replied. Accept the land grant as payment for services rendered, and then distance yourself for her sake as much as yours. A week ago, such a request would have seemed reasonable to Nathan. He had built his life in Willow Creek, around careful distance from its social fabric, focusing solely on his medical practice. But now, having witnessed Eleanor's spirit, her intelligence, her unexpected defense of him, the thought of deliberate withdrawal felt like a betrayal. I'll continue to treat Miss Parker with professional courtesy, Nathan said carefully. Beyond that, I make no promises. Parker's expression hardened. That's not good enough, Doctor. Not if you want that land. Petition approved. Then perhaps you should reconsider bringing it before the council, Nathan replied, rising from his chair. I won't be manipulated, Mr. Parker, not even for something I've wanted for years. Miss Parker deserves better than to be treated as a bargaining chip by either of us. He turned to leave, but Parker's next words stopped him cold. You know, Doctor, a man of mixed heritage operates in Willow Creek solely by the goodwill of its more established citizens. That goodwill can be remarkably fragile. Nathan turned back slowly. Are you threatening me, Mr. Parker? Merely stating facts, Parker replied with calculated casualness. Think carefully about your priorities, Blackwood. I'll expect your decision by tomorrow's appointment. As Nathan walked away, the weight of Parker's ultimatum settled on his shoulders like a physical burden. He had spent years building his practice in Willow Creek, years of proving himself through competence and dedication. All of that now balanced against something unnamed, but growing between himself and Eleanor Parker, something he hadn't sought but couldn't deny. For the first time since establishing his practice, Nathan found himself considering what it might mean to leave Willow Creek behind. The thought was both terrifying and strangely liberating. By the time he reached the garden gate, his decision was made. The whispers followed Nathan through town as he made his morning rounds the next day. Willow Creek was humming with speculation about the half-Apache doctor and William Parker's niece. Some versions painted him as a hero, others as an opportunist. The most malicious suggested improprieties during their time alone after the flood. Sarah Cooper, the midwife who occasionally assisted with his more difficult cases, cornered him outside Thompson's mercantile. You're playing with fire, Nathan, she warned. Her weathered face creased with genuine concern. Parker runs this town like his personal kingdom. Cross him, and you'll find yourself without patience or prospects. Nathan secured the supplies he'd purchased in his saddlebag. I'm treating an injured woman, Sarah. Nothing more. She gave him a knowing look. That's not what I heard from Martha. Says you two were thick as thieves in the garden yesterday, heads bent together like conspirators. Martha should mind her own business, Nathan muttered, though he wasn't surprised the housekeeper had been gossiping. Everyone's business is everyone's business in Willow Creek, Sarah reminded him, especially when it involves the great William, Parker's niece, and the— She hesitated. The half-breed doctor, Nathan finished for her, his tone flat. You can say it, Sarah. Everyone else does. The midwife had the grace to look embarrassed. You know I don't hold with such talk. But others do, and Parker can use that against you if he chooses. Nathan mounted his horse, adjusting the medical bag, secured behind his saddle. I appreciate your concern, but Miss Parker is my patient. I won't abandon her care because of town gossip. Sarah shook her head. Just be careful, Nathan. Some boundaries weren't meant to be crossed, not in places like this. Her warning followed him as he completed his morning calls, visiting Mrs. Thornton's newborn with a persistent cough and old Mr. Greeley's arthritic joints. Each patient seemed to study him with new interest, as if searching for signs of a man. Infatuated with the town founder's niece, by the time 2 o'clock approached, Nathan had made his decision. He would continue treating Eleanor until she was fully recovered, maintain absolute professionalism in their interactions, and accept whatever consequences came from defying William Parker. The land grant would have been valuable, but his integrity was worth more. He arrived at the Parker mansion precisely on time, as always. The housekeeper who answered his knock seemed unusually flustered. Miss Parker is in the parlor, Martha said, her voice stiff with disapproval. She's entertaining. Guests. Nathan followed her through the imposing entryway, hearing voices and laughter before they reached the parlor doors. Martha announced him with barely concealed distaste, and the conversation inside immediately quieted. Eleanor sat on a settee near the window, her splintered arm arranged carefully in its sling, her golden hair styled more elaborately than he'd seen before. But it was the others in the room that caught Nathan's attention. Franklin Reed from the search party, looking uncomfortably formal in a tailored suit. A young woman approximately Eleanor's age with fashionable clothes that must have come from Denver or beyond. And William Parker himself, watching Nathan's entrance with calculating eyes. Dr. Blackwood, Eleanor greeted him, her smile seeming forced. How kind of you to come. We were just discussing the upcoming Founders' Day celebration. Miss Parker, Nathan acknowledged with a slight bow. I see you're feeling well enough for company today. Uncle William thought it important for me to begin meeting Willow Creek society, she replied, her tone carrying an undertone he couldn't quite interpret. May I present Miss Olivia Hammond, daughter of Judge Hammond, and Mr. Franklin Reed, whom you've already met. Nathan nodded politely to both. Miss Hammond returned a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes, while Reed merely inclined his head with the barest civility. Dr. Blackwood has been most attentive to my recovery, Eleanor continued, a hint of defiance entering her voice. I might not have survived without his expertise. William Parker stepped forward smoothly. Yes, we're all grateful for the doctor's timely intervention. Now perhaps he might examine your progress somewhere more private. The library, perhaps. The suggestion was phrased as a question, but delivered as a command. Eleanor's eyes met Nathan's briefly, a silent communication he couldn't fully decipher, before she nodded and allowed Martha to help her rise. We'll continue our discussion of the celebration committee later, Parker said to the other guests. Martha, please show Miss Hammond and Mr. Reed to the garden while Dr. Blackwood completes his examination. As the others departed, Parker led Nathan and Eleanor to his book-lined library, closing the door behind them with a decisive click. Unlike the previous day's garden interaction, Parker clearly intended to supervise this meeting personally. How is your arm feeling today, Miss Parker? Nathan asked, maintaining strict professionalism as he set his medical bag on a nearby table. Considerably better, she replied, her tone matching his formal address, though still painful when moved. Nathan nodded, carefully examining the splint and making minor adjustments. The alignment remains good. Any headaches or dizziness since yesterday? None, Eleanor said. I believe I'm recovering quite well under your care, Doctor. William Parker observed their interaction from his position by the fireplace, his expression unreadable. I understand congratulations are in order, Blackwood, he said abruptly. The town council met in special session this morning. Your land petition has been unanimously approved. Nathan's hands stilled momentarily before continuing their work. I wasn't aware the vote had been moved up from Monday. I saw no reason to delay once the council members were properly informed of the situation, Parker replied smoothly. The deed will be transferred to your name by week's end. Eleanor glanced between them, clearly sensing the undercurrents. That's wonderful news, isn't it, Dr. Blackwood? Uncle William mentioned how long you've been trying to expand your medicinal garden. It's unexpected, Nathan said carefully, meeting Parker's gaze over Eleanor's head. Especially given our conversation yesterday. Parker's smile was thin. Consider it a gesture of goodwill, Doctor. And speaking of goodwill, he continued without pause, I've taken the liberty of consulting with Dr. Stevens about Eleanor's ongoing care. Eleanor stiffened beneath Nathan's hands. You did what? Stevens is the town's official physician, Parker said, as if explaining to a child. It's only proper that he assume responsibility for your treatment now that the immediate danger has passed. Dr. Stevens couldn't diagnose a broken leg if the bone was protruding through the skin, Eleanor replied with surprising heat. I've heard enough about his treatments from Martha to know I want nothing to do with him. Parker's expression hardened. Eleanor, you're new to Willow Creek. You don't understand how things work here. There are social considerations. If by social considerations you mean prejudice against Dr. Blackwood because of his heritage, then I understand perfectly, she shot back, and I want no part of it. Nathan cleared his throat, uncomfortable with being the center of this family dispute. Perhaps I should excuse myself while you discuss this privately. No, Eleanor said firmly, capturing his wrist with her uninjured hand. You're my doctor, and I won't be passed off to Stevens like an unwanted parcel. The touch of her fingers against his skin sent an unexpected warmth through Nathan, one he struggled to hide from Parker's watchful gaze. He gently disengaged himself, maintaining professional distance. Miss Parker, while I appreciate your confidence, your uncle has valid concerns about propriety, he said carefully. Dr. Stevens is fully qualified to bleed me until I faint, to dose me with mercury until my teeth fall out, Eleanor interrupted. No, thank you, Dr. Blackwood. I prefer modern medical science to medieval torture. Parker stepped forward, his patience clearly wearing thin. That's enough, Eleanor. Your father may have indulged your willfulness, but I won't. This is my house, my town, and you will abide by my decisions regarding your care. Eleanor's chin lifted in a gesture of defiance that Nathan was coming to recognize. And if I refuse, then perhaps Boston would be a more suitable home for you after all, Parker replied coldly. I invited you here believing you understood the opportunity being offered. A chance to establish yourself in respectable frontier society, to make an advantageous match, to help build something lasting. His gaze flicked briefly to Nathan, not to indulge in inappropriate attachments that can only lead to scandal. The accusation hung in the air between them. Nathan felt a surge of anger on Eleanor's behalf, but before he could speak, she rose from her chair with surprising steadiness. For someone still recovering from a concussion, if respectability means abandoning basic human decency, Uncle, then perhaps I am my father's daughter after all, she said, her voice quiet but firm. Dr. Blackwood saved my life at considerable risk to his own. He has treated me with nothing but respect and professionalism. If Willow Creek society cannot acknowledge that simple truth because of the circumstances of his birth, then I'm not certain I wish to be part of it. Parker's face flushed dark with anger. You've been here less than a week, Eleanor. You know nothing about this town, its people, or what's at stake. I know right from wrong, she replied simply. My father taught me that much at least. The tension in the room had reached a breaking point. Nathan knew he should excuse himself, remove the immediate cause of conflict, yet found himself reluctant to leave Eleanor alone to face her uncle's displeasure. Parker seemed to sense his indecision. I believe we're finished here, Doctor. He said dismissively. The land grant papers will be delivered to your cabin tomorrow. Consider your obligation to my niece's care fulfilled. Uncle William? Eleanor protested. It's all right, Miss Parker, Nathan said quietly. Your recovery is progressing well. Dr. Stevens is capable of monitoring your arm as it heals. The lie tasted bitter, but he knew prolonging this confrontation would only make things worse for Eleanor once he left. Her blue eyes searched his face, hurt and confusion evident. You're abandoning my care? The accusation stung more than it should have. I'm acknowledging your uncle's authority in this household, Nathan replied carefully, and respecting the established social order of Willow Creek. Something shifted. In her expression, disappointment perhaps, or the first stirrings of anger. I see how conventional of you, Dr. Blackwood. I expected better. The words cut deeper than any slur Nathan had endured in Willow Creek. He gathered his medical supplies with methodical precision, buying time to compose himself. I'll leave instructions for Dr. Stevens regarding the splint and future treatment, he said, addressing Parker rather than Eleanor. Miss Parker should continue to rest for at least another week before resuming normal activities. Parker nodded, satisfaction evident in his bearing. I'll see you out, Doctor. As Nathan followed Parker from the library, he risked one glance back at Eleanor. She stood by the window, her profile outlined against the afternoon light, her posture rigid with suppressed emotion. For a moment, their eyes met across the room, a connection charged with things unsaid, possibilities unrealized. Then Parker closed the door between them, and the moment was lost. You've made the wise choice, Blackwood, Parker said as they reached the front entrance. The land grant will serve you well, and in time Eleanor will understand this was for the best. Nathan met the older man's gaze directly. I didn't do this for the land, Mr. Parker. No? Parker raised an eyebrow. Then why? Because your niece has already lost her parents and her home. I won't be the cause of her losing what remains of her family as well. Nathan settled his hat on his head. Good day, Mr. Parker. As he rode away from the mansion, Nathan felt a hollowness in his chest that had nothing to do with hunger or fatigue. He had spent years building barriers between himself and the prejudice of Willow Creek, constructing a careful existence on the margins of society. In less than a week, Eleanor Parker had somehow slipped past those defenses, awakening possibilities he'd long since abandoned. And now, to protect her, he'd severed the connection himself. The irony wasn't lost on him. After years of being rejected by Willow Creek society, he had finally chosen to embrace its boundaries, only to find himself longing to break them more than ever before. A week passed, then two. Spring advanced across the Colorado Territory, bringing wildflowers to the hills and new patients to Nathan's door. The land grant was officially transferred to his name, as Parker had promised. Nathan began preparing the soil for an expanded medicinal garden, though he found little joy in the work that had once excited him. He heard about Eleanor only through town gossip. Dr. Stevens had taken over her care, pronouncing her delicate and prescribing extended bed rest, a diagnosis Nathan knew to be unnecessary given her rapid recovery when under his treatment. She had appeared at Sunday church services on Parker's arm, looking pale but composed. The following week, she'd attended a tea at Judge Hammond's residence, where Olivia Hammond had reportedly introduced her to several eligible young men from prominent local families. Nathan told himself it was better this way. Eleanor would integrate into Willow Creek society, perhaps eventually marry someone like Franklin Reed and build the life her uncle envisioned for her. The strange connection between them, born in crisis, nurtured through those brief interactions, would fade with time. He almost believed it, until the night Sarah Cooper pounded on his cabin door long after midnight, her face tight with urgency. "It's Parker's niece," she said without preamble. "Stevens has been treating her arm wound with mercury salve and bloodletting for what he's calling nervous fever. She's gotten worse instead of better." Nathan stiffened. "Mercury for a broken arm? Claims the bone isn't healing properly, that she's developed blood poisoning." Sarah's disgust was evident. "Martha sent for me secretly when the girl began vomiting and couldn't keep anything down. Nathan, she's showing signs of mercury poisoning." "Damn that fool," Nathan muttered, already reaching for his medical bag. "How did you get away to come?" "Here, Martha convinced Parker to ride for the priest in Silverton. He thinks his niece is dying." Sarah's weathered face creased with worry. She might be if Stevens continues his treatment. Martha's dismissed him for the night, but he'll be back at first light. Nathan hesitated, calculating risks. William Parker had made his position clear. Nathan was to stay away from Eleanor. Returning now would undo whatever fragile acceptance he'd built in Willow Creek. But if Sarah was right about mercury poisoning— "Give me 5 minutes," he said, already gathering supplies. They rode hard through the moonlit night, following the river trail that cut miles off the journey to town. Nathan's mind raced ahead to treatment protocols. If Stevens had been systematically poisoning Eleanor with mercury compounds under the guise of medicine, the effects could be reversed if caught early enough. But time was critical. The Parker mansion loomed dark and imposing against the starlit sky. Sarah led him to the servants' entrance at the back of the house, where Martha awaited them, her normally stern face etched with fear. "She's much worse," the housekeeper whispered, leading them upstairs via the back staircase. "Trembling something awful, and her gums have started bleeding. Mr. Parker left for Silverton an hour ago." "Has Stevens documented his treatments?" Nathan asked as they hurried down the hallway. "Keeps a ledger by her bedside," Martha confirmed. "Says it's to track her progress, but if you ask me, it's to cover himself if things go badly." Eleanor's room was dimly lit by a single lamp. The sweet, cloying scent of mercury salve hung in the air, mixing with the sour smell of illness. Nathan's heart constricted at the sight of her, skin ashen, hair lank with sweat, lips cracked and bleeding at the corners. A var cry from the vibrant woman who had challenged her uncle in the library 2 weeks earlier. "Eleanor," he said softly, approaching the bed. "Can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered, then opened. Recognition dawned slowly in her fever-bright eyes. "Dr. Blackwood?" Her voice emerged as a cracked whisper. "Am I dreaming?" "No," he assured her, already reaching for her wrist to check her pulse. Rapid and thready. Not good. "I'm here to help." "Knew you'd come," she murmured. "A ghost." Of a smile crossing her parched lips, told Martha. "Just get word to him." Nathan exchanged glances with Sarah. Eleanor had anticipated this intervention, had perhaps even planned for it. The realization both troubled and touched him. "I need to examine you," he said. "All business now." "Sarah, help me sit her up." "Martha, bring fresh water and clean cloths." The women moved efficiently to assist. Nathan located Stevens's treatment ledger and flipped through it, his anger mounting with each page. The fool had been applying mercury salve directly to the healing surgical wound, claiming to draw out corrupt humors. He'd also administered calomel, mercury chloride, internally for the supposed fever, and had performed 3 separate bloodlettings. Over the past 10 days, medieval butchery, Nathan muttered, tossing the ledger aside. He turned his attention to Eleanor, gently unwrapping the bandages from her arm. The splint had been removed prematurely and the surgical site was red and inflamed from the toxic salve. But worse, Eleanor's hands trembled uncontrollably, a classic symptom of mercury toxicity. "How long has she been like this?" he asked Martha, who hovered anxiously nearby. "The trembling started 3 days ago," the housekeeper replied. "Dr. Stevens said it was the fever worsening, that more aggressive treatment was needed." Her voice lowered. "Mr. Parker believed him. He's known Stevens for 20 years. Nathan bit back his immediate response. "Recriminations wouldn't help Eleanor now. I need milk, raw eggs, and whatever slippery elm bark you have in the kitchen," he instructed. "Quickly." While Martha hurried to gather the items, Nathan examined Eleanor more thoroughly. Her gums showed the telltale inflammation of mercury, poisoning, and her pupils reacted sluggishly to light. When he pressed gently on her abdomen, she winced in pain. Kidney involvement likely. "You'll need to drink something unpleasant," he told her, maintaining a calm tone despite his growing concern. "It will help draw the mercury out of your system." "Whatever you say, doctor," she whispered, her trust in him evident despite her weakened state. "I knew. Stevens was making me worse." Her trembling fingers sought his hand. Uncle William wouldn't listen. Nathan squeezed her hand gently. "We'll discuss your uncle later. For now, focus on getting this poison out of your system." When Martha returned with the requested items, Nathan prepared the antidote, a mixture of milk, raw eggs, and slippery elm that would bind to the mercury in Eleanor's digestive tract. Sarah helped hold Eleanor upright, while he carefully spooned the mixture between her cracked lips. "All of it," he encouraged when she grimaced at the taste. "It's your best chance." Eleanor managed to consume most of the mixture before exhaustion overtook her. Nathan then prepared a poultice of activated charcoal for the inflamed wound, wrapping it carefully and resplinting the arm that had begun to heal improperly under Stevens's neglect. "She'll need constant monitoring," he told Sarah and Martha. "The next 12 hours are critical. The mixture will cause vomiting and diarrhea. That's good. It means the mercury is being expelled. Keep her hydrated between episodes." "What about when Mr. Parker returns with the priest?" Martha asked, wringing her hands. "Or when Dr. Stevens comes back in the morning?" Nathan straightened, decision made. "I'm not leaving her. Parker can have me arrested if he wants, but I won't abandon her to that butcher again." Martha exchanged glances with Sarah, then nodded once, firmly. "I'll manage Mr. Parker, and I'll make sure Stevens doesn't set foot in this room again." The night passed in tense vigilance. As Nathan had predicted, the antidote worked aggressively to purge Eleanor's system. Between episodes, she drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes recognizing Nathan, other times calling for her father in the grip of fever dreams. He bathed her face with cool cloths, monitored her pulse, and administered small sips of honeyed water to combat dehydration. Near dawn, her fever finally broke. Nathan sat beside her bed, medical texts open on his lap, searching for additional treatments. Eleanor stirred, her eyes opening with more clarity than they'd shown all night. "You stayed," she murmured, her voice hoarse but stronger. "Of course," he replied, setting aside the book to check her pulse, slower now, more regular. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been trampled by wild horses," she admitted with a weak smile. "But my thoughts are clearer. The room has stopped spinning." Nathan nodded, encouraged by these signs. "The tremors have lessened too. We caught the poisoning before permanent damage could occur." Eleanor's gaze held his, something unspoken passing between them. "You came back, even after Uncle William forbade it. You needed a doctor, not a politician with a medical degree, Nathan replied simply. Her fingers sought his, the touch feather-light but deliberate. Thank you for not abandoning me, even when it seemed you had. The words hung between them, laden with meaning beyond her medical care. Nathan knew he should maintain professional distance, especially now, with Eleanor vulnerable and Parker's return imminent. But he found himself responding to her touch, his fingers curling gently around hers. I made a mistake, walking away before, he admitted quietly. It won't happen again. A soft knock at the door interrupted the moment. Martha entered, her expression grim. Riders approaching from the east, she reported. Mr. Parker, returning with the priest. And I just got word that Stevens is making his morning rounds early today. Reality crashed back. Nathan rose reluctantly, releasing Eleanor's hand. How do you want to handle this? He asked, deferring to Eleanor despite his medical instincts screaming that she needed continued treatment. Eleanor pushed herself up against the pillows, wincing with the effort but determination evident in her face. I want you to stay right. Here, Dr. Blackwood. It's time my uncle understood some boundaries of his own. Eleanor, Nathan cautioned, confronting your uncle in your weakened state is precisely what needs to happen, she interrupted. He needs to see what his precious Dr. Stevens has done to me. Martha, help me sit properly, please. And Dr. Blackwood, stand beside me. I want Uncle William to see exactly who saved my life. Again. The housekeeper hurried to prop Eleanor up. With pillows, adjusting her nightgown and brushing her tangled hair quickly, Nathan positioned himself at the bedside, medical bag open, professional demeanor firmly in place. If this confrontation was inevitable, he would meet it as a doctor, not as a man with growing feelings for William Parker's niece. They didn't wait long. Heavy footsteps pounded up the main staircase, followed by Parker's voice tight with anxiety, questioning the housekeeper about Eleanor's condition through the night. The door burst open. William Parker stood frozen on the threshold, taking in the scene before him, Eleanor sitting upright, pale but alert, Nathan standing beside her bed, Sarah Cooper gathering soiled linens in the corner, evidence of the night's medical battle scattered around the room. What is the meaning of this? Parker demanded, gaze hardening as it fixed on Nathan. Blackwood, I expressly forbade. Uncle William, Eleanor cut in, her voice surprisingly strong despite her ordeal. Before you continue, I suggest you look at Dr. Stevens's treatment ledger on that table. Then perhaps you might want to dismiss the priest you've brought to administer last rites. Parker faltered, his attention drawn to the slim, leather-bound book. Behind him, a confused-looking priest and an indignant Dr. Stevens hovered in the doorway. Mr. Parker, this is highly irregular, Stevens blustered. This man has no authority to interfere with my patient. Your patient, Nathan said quietly, was dying of mercury poisoning, administered under the guise of medical treatment. The accusation landed like a physical blow. Parker's face drained of color as he snatched up the ledger, flipping through the pages with growing horror. Mercury. Salve? Calomel? For a broken arm? His voice rose with each question. Stevens, what is the meaning of this? The town doctor drew himself up defensively. Standard treatment for corrupt humors and nervous fever, which the young lady clearly developed after her ordeal. If Blackwood had properly treated her from the beginning, instead of filling her head with inappropriate ideas, Dr. Blackwood, Eleanor interrupted coldly, saved my life twice now. Once from drowning, and now from your poisonous standard treatments. She turned to her uncle, strength seeming to flow from her anger. I was not delirious when I told you Stevens was making me worse. You chose not to listen because his social standing was more important to you than my health. Parker stood speechless, caught between his niece's accusation and the evidence in the treatment ledger. The priest, sensing a family matter beyond his purview, quietly excused himself. Stevens remained, sputtering ineffectual defenses. "I think," Parker said finally, his voice dangerously quiet, "that Dr. Stevens should leave this house immediately." He turned to the town doctor. "We will discuss your future in Willow Creek at a more appropriate time." Stevens blanched. "Now see here, Parker. Get out!" The two words carried such authority that Stevens backed away, nearly stumbling over his own feet in his haste to retreat. When the door closed behind him, Parker turned back to Eleanor, and, Nathan conflict evident in his expression, "Blackwood, it appears I owe you—" "An apology?" Eleanor suggested, arching an eyebrow despite her weakened state. "Recognition that your prejudice nearly cost me my life. Acknowledgement that Dr. Blackwood's medical expertise exceeds his social standing in your precious hierarchy." "Eleanor," Nathan cautioned, concerned about her expending precious energy on this confrontation. She ignored him, gaze fixed on her uncle. "I trusted you to welcome me into your home, to help me build a new life after losing everything. Instead, you treated me as a pawn in your social games. Worse, you dismissed my concerns about my own health because they didn't align with your preconceptions." Parker stood rigid, pride battling with the undeniable evidence before him. "I was trying to protect you," he said stiffly, "to ensure your future in Willow Creek. By separating me from the only person who truly put my welfare above social considerations." Eleanor shook her head, then winced at the movement. "That's not protection, Uncle. That's control." The words hung in the air between them, a gauntlet thrown down with quiet dignity. Nathan watched Parker's reaction carefully, ready to intervene if the confrontation further taxed Eleanor's fragile recovery. But something unexpected happened. William Parker, town founder, mining magnate, social arbiter of Willow Creek, seemed to deflate before their eyes. He sank into the chair beside Eleanor's bed, suddenly looking every one of his 60-odd years. "You remind me so much of your father," he said quietly. "James never backed down either, never accepted the world as it was." A ghost of a smile touched his face. "It's why we quarreled, you know. He saw the world as it should be. I saw it as it was. Practical versus idealistic." Eleanor's expression softened slightly. "The world only changes when someone is brave enough to live as if it already had." Parker glanced at Nathan, then back to his niece. "And you believe Dr. Blackwood represents this braver world?" "I believe," Eleanor said carefully, "that judging a man's worth by his heritage rather than his actions is not only unjust but dangerous, as the past 24 hours have proven." Nathan remained silent, understanding that this was a pivotal moment between uncle and niece, one that would shape not only Eleanor's future in Willow Creek, but potentially his own as well. Parker studied his hands for a long moment. When he looked up, his expression was resolute, though whether in surrender or new determination remained unclear. "Dr. Blackwood," he said formally, "I would be grateful if you would continue to oversee my niece's recovery. Whatever your fee, I'll pay it." It wasn't quite an apology, but from William Parker, it was a seismic shift nonetheless. Nathan glanced at Eleanor, whose eyes shone with triumph despite her exhaustion. "I'd be happy to continue Miss Parker's treatment," he replied with equal formality. "My primary concern has always been her health." Parker nodded once, then rose. "I'll leave you to your work then. Martha will provide whatever you require." He hesitated at the door. "And Dr. Blackwood, perhaps we might discuss your expanded practice needs once Eleanor is recovered. That land grant seems insufficient compensation for saving her life twice." With that surprising concession, Parker departed, leaving Nathan and Eleanor alone, save for Sarah's quiet presence in the corner. "Well?" Eleanor said softly, a smile playing at her lips despite her evident exhaustion. "It seems the impossible has happened. William Parker has admitted he was wrong. Not in so many words, Nathan cautioned, though he couldn't help returning her smile. Close enough, she murmured, her eyelids growing heavy as the energy from the confrontation ebbed. We've won the first battle, Dr. Blackwood. The war for Willow Creek may yet be ours. As Eleanor drifted into healing sleep, Nathan replaced the cool cloth on her forehead, his thoughts turning to her words. The war for Willow Creek, not just for his acceptance as a doctor, but for a community that might judge people by their actions rather than their bloodlines. It was a war he'd stopped, fighting years ago, content to exist on society's margins so long as he could practice medicine. But Eleanor Parker had reignited that abandoned hope, making him believe change might be possible after all. The question remained. Was he brave enough to fight alongside her, knowing the cost such battles inevitably demanded? As the morning sun streamed through the window, illuminating Eleanor's sleeping face, Nathan found himself hoping the answer was yes. Summer came to Willow Creek in a blaze of wildflowers and whispered rumors. The story of Eleanor Parker's near death from Dr. Stevens' poisonous treatments spread through town like wildfire, growing more dramatic with each retelling. By June, the consensus version claimed that William Parker had held a gun to Stevens' head, while Dr. Blackwood performed a miraculous cure using ancient Apache medicine. The truth, while less sensational, had nonetheless transformed the town in subtle but significant ways. Stevens had departed Willow Creek under a cloud of scandal, relocating to a mining camp 50 miles north, where his dangerous methods could continue unchallenged. William Parker, in an unprecedented reversal, had publicly endorsed Nathan as the town's primary physician, even arranging for the construction of a proper clinic adjacent to Nathan's cabin. And Eleanor Parker, fully recovered from both her broken arm and mercury poisoning, had established herself as a force to be reckoned with in Willow Creek society, though not in the way her uncle had initially envisioned. Miss Parker's clinic day is the talk of the territory, Sarah Cooper remarked as she helped Nathan organize supplies in his new examination room. Miners' wives who'd never set foot in town before are bringing their children for checkups. Even some of the Apache women from the reservation came last week. Nathan smiled, recalling Eleanor's determination to make health care accessible to those typically excluded from Willow Creek's medical services. She'd converted the Parker Mansion's garage house into a weekly women's clinic, staffed by herself, Sarah, and Nathan when complex cases arose. Eleanor has a gift for breaking down barriers, he agreed. Once she sets her mind to something, opposition becomes merely an interesting challenge. Sarah gave him a knowing look. You two seem to have figured out your own interesting challenges. Heat crept up Nathan's neck. His relationship with Eleanor had evolved cautiously over the past months, conducted largely in public view to avoid the worst of the gossip. Professional collaboration had gradually given way to something deeper, though neither had put a name to it yet. We're colleagues, he said, though the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. Sarah hummed skeptically. Colleagues who look at each other like that? In my day, we called it something else entirely. Before Nathan could respond, the clinic door opened, admitting a breathless young boy, Tommy Jenkins, whose family ran the livery stable. Dr. Blackwood, he gasped. You gotta come quick. There's been an accident at the mine, cave-in, men trapped. Mr. Parker sent me to fetch you. Nathan grabbed his emergency bag, always prepared for such eventualities in a mining town. How many injured? Don't know yet, they're still digging. Tommy twisted his cap anxiously. Miss Parker's already headed there with bandages and such. Of course she had. In the months since her recovery, Eleanor had appointed herself Nathan's unofficial assistant during emergencies, much to her uncle's initial dismay. Now William Parker had apparently sent for Nathan directly, another small sign of how much had changed. Sarah, send word to Dr. Martinez in Silverton if you can, Nathan instructed as he headed for the door. We may need help if there are multiple serious injuries. The mine entrance was chaotic when Nathan arrived. Men streamed in and out, carrying timber supports and tools. A growing crowd of worried wives and children gathered at a safe distance. William Parker stood at the center of activity, issuing orders with the decisive authority that had built Willow Creek from nothing. "Blackwood," Parker acknowledged, with a grim nod. 7 men trapped when the south shaft collapsed. "We've reached 3 already, minor injuries. Eleanor's tending to them over there." He gestured toward a makeshift treatment area where Eleanor knelt beside a miner with a bleeding head wound. 4 still unaccounted for, including Franklin Reed. Nathan nodded, mentally preparing for what might emerge from the dark shaft. "How long before you reach them?" "The rescue team says another hour, maybe 2. The collapse destabilized the entire section." Parker's weathered face showed rare emotion. "Reed was inspecting my new silver vein. If he's lost—" "Let's focus on getting them out first," Nathan said firmly. He headed toward Eleanor, noting her composed efficiency as she bandaged the miner's head. She looked up as he approached, relief evident in her eyes. "Nathan, thank goodness. Jackson here has a concussion but seems stable. The others just cuts and bruises." "You've done well," he said, quickly examining her handiwork. Over the past months, he'd been teaching her basic medical procedures, impressed by how quickly she absorbed the knowledge. "Any word from inside about the condition of the others?" Eleanor's expression sobered. "The rescue team can hear tapping from where they're trapped, but there's water rising in that section. They're worried." She didn't need to finish. Mine flooding was every mining town's nightmare, often more deadly than the initial collapse. The next hours passed in tense activity. Nathan prepared treatment areas for different categories of injury, while Eleanor organized the growing number of women who had arrived to help, setting them to boiling water, tearing bandages, and preparing broth for the rescued men. The sun had begun to set when a shout came from the mine entrance. "We've broken through! They're alive!" The waiting crowd surged forward, held back only by Parker's foreman forming a human barrier. Nathan and Eleanor rushed toward the mine as the first of the trapped men emerged, grimy, bloody, but walking. Under his own power, 2 more followed, supported by rescue workers, their faces pale beneath the coal dust. Nathan immediately directed them to treatment areas, assessing injuries as they moved. Then the crowd fell silent. The rescue team emerged, carrying a stretcher bearing Franklin Reed's motionless form. "Get him to the surgery area now," Nathan ordered. Rushing ahead to prepare, Reed's skin held the grey pallor of severe blood loss, and his right leg was clearly crushed below the knee, the mine boot saturated with blood despite a makeshift tourniquet. "Eleanor, I need you," Nathan called as they laid Reed on the treatment table. She appeared instantly at his side, face set with determination. "Chloroform, carefully, then assist with instruments." They worked in practiced synchronicity. Eleanor, administering the anesthetic while Nathan cut away the ruined boot to assess the damage. The leg was beyond saving, the bones shattered, tissue already showing signs of necrosis from hours of compromised blood flow. "It needs to come off," Nathan said quietly, "or he'll die from gangrene within days." Eleanor nodded, no trace of squeamishness in her expression. "What do you need from me?" "Steadiness, and prayer that he survives the shock." Nathan looked up, finding William Parker standing nearby, watching with undisguised concern. "Mr. Parker, he's going to lose the leg. I need your consent as his employer." Parker hesitated only briefly. "Save his life, Doctor, whatever it takes." What followed was the most challenging amputation Nathan had performed since his wartime service. Eleanor proved invaluable, anticipating his needs, monitoring Reed's breathing under the chloroform, applying pressure to control bleeding when necessary. By the time Nathan tied off the final suture on the neatly trimmed stump, twilight had deepened to full darkness, the surgery illuminated by dozens of lanterns. "He'll live," Nathan announced, straightening to ease his cramped back. Assuming infection doesn't set in, a collective exhale seemed to pass through the onlookers. Parker stepped forward, resting a hand briefly on Nathan's shoulder, a public gesture of respect that would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier. "Thank you, Doctor," he said simply. "Reed is important to this town's future." His gaze drifted meaningfully toward Eleanor, who was clearing away bloodied instruments. Nathan understood the implication. Despite everything that had happened, Parker still harbored hopes of a match between Eleanor and Reed, the kind of suitable alliance he'd envisioned from the beginning. "He'll need constant monitoring tonight," Nathan replied, deliberately sidestepping the personal implications. "I'd like to move him to the clinic once he's stable enough for transport." As the crowd dispersed and Reed was settled into a wagon for the careful journey to Nathan's clinic, Eleanor finally allowed exhaustion to show on her face. Her dress was stained with blood, her hair escaping its pins, her eyes shadowed with fatigue. "You were remarkable today," Nathan told her quietly as they walked behind the wagon. "You have a natural talent for medicine." "I had an excellent teacher," she replied with a tired smile, "though I suspect Uncle William is reconsidering his blessing on my medical adventures after seeing me elbow-deep in Franklin Reed's surgery." "Your uncle," Nathan observed, "has proven more adaptable than I would have believed possible." Eleanor glanced toward where Parker rode ahead with the wagon, ensuring Reed's transport went smoothly. "He's a practical man, above all else. Once he realized his vision for Willow Creek required your medical expertise and my stubborn insistence. Unuseful occupation, he adjusted accordingly." They walked in comfortable silence for a moment before Eleanor spoke again, her voice softer. "Nathan, there's something I've been meaning to discuss with you, about the future." Something in her tone made his pulse quicken. "What about it?" "Uncle William took me aside last week to discuss my prospects." She chose her words carefully. "He believes it's time I consider a more permanent arrangement in Willow Creek." Nathan felt a familiar knot form in his stomach. Despite the changes of recent months, William Parker was still William Parker, a man with definite ideas about suitable matches for his niece. And despite his growing acceptance of Nathan as the town's physician, a half-Apache doctor would never qualify as an appropriate husband for Eleanor Parker. "I see," he said neutrally. "And what did you tell him?" Eleanor stopped walking, turning to face him fully in the gathering darkness. "I told him I agreed completely." Before Nathan could process the implications of this unexpected response, Eleanor continued, "I told him I'd already determined whom I wished to marry, and that while he might find my choice unconventional, it was not negotiable." The knot in Nathan's stomach transformed into something warmer, more hopeful. "Eleanor, I know what you're going to say," she interrupted, a hint of her characteristic stubbornness entering her voice. "That it would be difficult, that people would talk, that your practice might suffer. But Nathan, look around us." She gestured toward the town, where lights glowed in windows and the community was rallying to support the injured miners. "Willow Creek is changing. We're changing it together." Nathan took her hands, heedless of who might see. "And your uncle? What did he say to this non-negotiable choice of yours?" A smile played at Eleanor's lips. "He said he'd suspected as much. Since the night you saved me from Stevens's poisonous treatments. Said he'd seen the way we looked at each other and knew it was only a matter of time." "William Parker said that." Nathan couldn't keep the disbelief from his voice. "Well, not in those exact words," Eleanor admitted. "There was a great deal about reputation and challenges and whether I understood what I was choosing. But in the end he said something that surprised me." Her voice softened. "He said my father would have approved of a man who put principles above personal gain and healing above social standing." The comparison to Eleanor's idealistic father, the brother, Parker had quarreled with decades ago, spoke volumes about how much Parker's own perspective had evolved. And now, Nathan asked, still cautious despite the hope rising in his chest, what does William Parker think of his niece marrying the half-Apache doctor of Willow Creek? He thinks, came Parker's voice from behind them, causing both to startle, that his niece could do far worse than a man who's saved her life twice and proven his worth to this town 100 times over. Parker had doubled back from the wagon procession, his expression unreadable in the dim light. He approached slowly, hands clasped behind his back. "Blackwood," he said formally, "I believe you have something to ask me regarding my niece's future." Nathan straightened, never releasing Eleanor's hands. "Mr. Parker, I would like your blessing to marry Eleanor." Parker studied him for a long moment. "Will you continue to expand medical services in Willow Creek? Train others as you've trained Eleanor? Build something that outlasts both of us?" "Yes," Nathan replied without hesitation. "That's always been my intention. And will you accept that there will be those, even with my influence, who will never approve? Who will make life difficult for both of you because of their prejudice?" Eleanor answered before Nathan could. "We've already faced worse than disapproval, Uncle. Fear of what others think seems a poor reason to deny happiness." Parker nodded slowly, as if confirming something to himself. "Then you have my blessing for whatever that's worth to either of you." A ghost of a smile touched his face. "Your father would be proud, Eleanor. He always did insist the world could be better than it was, if people were brave enough to live as though it already had changed." The echo of Eleanor's earlier words, clearly a philosophy inherited from her father, hung in the night air between them. Parker turned to go, then paused. "The wedding will be held at the mansion, of course. The town founder's niece deserves nothing less than the social event of the year." With that practical assertion of his continuing influence, he strode back toward the wagon and its injured passenger. Nathan and Eleanor looked at each other, momentarily speechless at the unexpected turn of events before breaking into quiet laughter. "Well, Dr. Blackwood," Eleanor said, her eyes bright with amusement and something deeper, "it seems we've been granted official permission to scandalize Willow Creek society." "Miss Parker," he replied, drawing her closer, "I believe we've been doing that since the day I pulled you from that flood." Their kiss, there on the darkened road, with the town's lights glimmering behind them, sealed a promise that had been forming since that first desperate day. A promise not just to each other, but to the vision of what Willow Creek might become under their influence. A place where a person's worth was measured by their actions rather than their bloodline. A community where healing transcended social boundaries. It wouldn't be easy. Change never was, especially in a frontier town set in its ways. But as Nathan held Eleanor in the gathering darkness, he knew they had already weathered the worst of the storm. What came next, they would face together. And in that certainty, there was all the hope either of them needed to forge their unexpected path forward. The half-Apache doctor and the Boston lady who had found each other against all odds in the raw, unforgiving beauty of the Colorado frontier. The wedding of Dr. Nathan Blackwood and Eleanor Parker took place on a brilliant autumn day when the aspen leaves had turned to gold against the mountains. William Parker had indeed made it the social event of the season, inviting prominent families from as far as Denver. To everyone's surprise, Nathan's mother attended, traveling from the reservation with a small delegation of Apache relatives. Eleanor welcomed them with the same grace she extended to the governor's wife, thereby setting the tone for the celebration and for the integrated medical practice that would eventually make Willow Creek a model for the territory. Franklin Reed, recovered from his amputation and fitted with a wooden leg of Nathan's design, stood as William Parker's representative in the ceremony. He had long since recognized that Eleanor's heart belonged elsewhere and had found purpose in using his mining expertise to improve safety practices throughout the region. As Nathan and Eleanor exchanged vows beneath an arbor of autumn flowers, the gathered crowd represented every facet of frontier society: miners and merchants, ranchers and railroad men, proper ladies and practical midwives, even a small group from the Apache reservation who had come to honor the medicine man's son. And his chosen bride, if some disapproved, they kept their peace in the face of William Parker's evident blessing. And if others whispered that the match was scandalous, those whispers faded as the years passed, and the Blackwood Medical Clinic became known throughout Colorado as a place where everyone, regardless of race, social standing, or ability to pay, received the same high standard of care. The flash flood that had nearly claimed Eleanor's life became a footnote in their story, overshadowed by the hundreds of lives they saved together and the generations of healers they trained. And when William Parker finally passed on, his substantial fortune went not toward mining expansion, but to establish the Parker Blackwood School of Medicine, the first in the territory to accept women and Native American students on equal footing. With white men, some called it progress, some called it radical. But those who knew the story from the beginning understood it was simply the natural conclusion to that fateful day when a half-Apache doctor had pulled a dying woman from the floodwaters, and in saving her, found the courage to change the world. Around them, one patient and one prejudice at a time. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.
Maybe I'll find a side quest that like sticks and is really successful and gives me that flexibility to make a decision like that, where I can be like part-time engineer, like software engineering specialist or consultant type of thing. Then one of these side quests decides to be like a full-time gig, who knows? But yeah. By the way, I definitely need that shirt NPC. That would be fucking amazing. Right? Wouldn't it be, Fox? Like having a ability to do like all my side quests would be my absolute dream, really. And so, like, with that said, I'm going to be trying to really give it a good shot. I don't want to overwhelm myself, obviously, and want to prioritize the process of getting a job in my field and what I specialize in when it comes to software engineering. At the same token, I think I would do myself a disservice if I did not try the side quests at the same time to some extent. Not like kind of like specializing in a couple of things with 3D printing. So I'm going to open a 3D printing business on Etsy. And then I'm also going to open a fourth wall ceramics shop. And I'm in the process, like I'm a beginner when it comes to ceramic art. But that's going to be, certainly discounted as well, while I'm in the learning phase. But yeah, we're going to try it out. And if people are interested in those pieces, then that'll be amazing. And so I'm excited for these little side quests, two areas that I've been, working at for a little bit of time since last year. Been working at the 3D printing for over a year now. Modeling, I've been doing 3D modeling for about 6 months. And then everything else, like the ceramic arts, I'd probably say a good 6 months I have under my belt, but certainly, oh my gosh, certainly still an amateur for sure. But, with that said, it'll definitely be discounted rates because I mean, it's a student, it's a student. It has to be a student price in my opinion to make it fair. Yes, for science, exactly, Tash, 100%. So I think what it is for me, it's like I want to do the side quests. We're certainly going to continue streaming as well during this time as well. That's the other side quest, like, and see where the streaming thing leads as well. Because I love the community we've made here, and I love that I've been able very thankful for the consistency that I've shown to myself is possible with streaming, because I started streaming in, well, at least on Twitch, I started in 2018, but I was very much just very seldom